Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. Alberta politics at all levels is always dynamic. It is always all these little twists and turns and these little surprises. And sometimes they're horrifying and sometimes they're actually really not that bad at all. And we've seen one of these little twists and turns unfold over the last, let's go with year and a half, 2 years, in regards to somebody who used to be very active in certainly municipal politics, but prior to that, very active in the conservative movement overall, as we speak in broad terms. I'm not going to do his bio for him. He's going to do it for himself because that's the way that we try to do things here. But he tagged in on one of our Twitter live spaces a little while ago, and I immediately jumped on the opportunity to say, oh, you're coming on the show, right? And he has graciously agreed to have a conversation with us tonight. And so it is my privilege to welcome to the show none other than Mr. Jeromy Pathfinder Farkas. How's it going, sir?
Hey, thanks for having me. I so appreciate it.
So, I mean, I have a laundry list of things that I want to get in with you tonight because I find your story to be so fascinating in so many ways. But rather than me try to tease out little bits, I'm going to let you tee the ball up here. So, who is Jeromy Farkas? What's your story, man?
Oh, well, born and raised Calgarian, grew up in East Calgary and Dover. Came from a pretty conservative family, I'd say, immigrant, newcomers, Catholic, challenging childhood for a number of different reasons, but didn't really have anything handed to me. I had to put myself through school. My first job, I had to lie to get my first job just by virtue of my age so that I could help pay the bills and save up money for the bus pass and stuff like that. Worked Dover, Forest Lawn as a busboy, worked at the Forest Lawn Dairy Queen, getting my degree at the U of C. I worked as a factory mill worker, that sort of thing, and then got into tech and then into the sort of research think tanky world. I found it was a little bit too abstract for me, so I decided to do the craziest thing possible as a guy in his mid-20s, but to run for city council. Knocked on a hell of a lot of doors and found myself in the awkward situation of sort of like the dog who caught the car, and elected as one of the youngest city councilors ever elected, and all of a sudden in this crazy position of having to do a lot of the things that I said I'd do, and some of it was probably on the stupider side and didn't get me any votes, things like being the only city councilor to turn down the pension and stuff like that. But I figured if I said I was going to do it, I would do it. And I would say, looking back in terms of my own council career, it was sort of marked with a little bit of impatience. And I think a lot of people who've watched City Hall or the bureaucracy or city council can share in that frustration. And this is not necessarily like a conservative or progressive critique. It's just such a huge ship, and it's very, very difficult to move in one direction or the other. And for somebody like me who came from, say, trying to start my own small business and stuff like that, I just was not moving at the pace that I wanted to. And not to explain away some of the challenges that I had, even on a personal or professional level, but quite frustrated with sort of the status quo and how things went. And probably through that process, made a name for myself. And whether that's fame or infamy, that's an exercise for the listener, I suppose. But ultimately kind of found myself stagnant in that city councilor role. Decided to run for mayor after a full, I think, year of running for mayor, and I ultimately placed second. I stood up on the stage. I looked out into the crowd of supporters, my family. I start to see my mom begin to cry, and in that moment, I thought that everything was over and my life was finished. But like everything else, losses happen. You wake up the next day, you get back to work, and in the days and the weeks following that, I had a lot of people encouraging me to run again for office. I actually had a stack of about, I think, 5 or 6 checks from people who said, they wanted to be the first person to write me a check for my next campaign, and they were left blank. It was sort of like a donation to the next campaign for MLA, for MP, for mayor, for city councilor, and it was just fill in the blank. And then I sort of thought to myself, there's a lot of other things I want to do in my life besides politics. And I reached out to these folks and I said, I have this crazy idea to run across a continent from Mexico to Canada, and I want to do it as a fundraiser. Do you mind donating to that? And to my astonishment, I think 90% of the people said yes. And before I knew it, we already hit $50,000 before I even set one foot on the trail. And then the whole story of being on the trail is probably longer than we can get into here, but about a 170-day journey, as I mentioned, from Mexico to Canada, through the desert, through the mountains. And it was just really an incredible experience. And my own journey out there, getting certified as a wilderness first responder, meeting all the incredible fellow hikers, as well as the trail angels, people in the community that I would pass through Washington, Oregon, and California. It was just incredible. And I could probably speak for hours and hours about that, but just being thrown into like a social setting that was very different than what I was used to, because again, remember, sort of my transition was from high school debate club into University of Calgary campus conservative club, into conservative think tank, into elected office, right? So the I would meet a lot of people through all of that, but the realm or the universe of the social connections were probably not as wide as you would expect. And I think also losing the election gave me this incredible gift, in that I start to get a sense of actually who my friends were. And it really surprised me following the election loss, the people who were interested in me in terms of what I could do as a human being versus being interested in me versus in terms of like what I could do for them as a vote on city council. And it was an incredible learning exercise to find out that a lot of people who are surrounding me weren't actually all that interested in me as a human being, but the people who actually had a genuine interest in me, it didn't line up on political ideology. I sort of assumed that, it was going to be the conservatives who are still my friends and the progressives who would hate me, but there was no quick and easy explanation for who would answer my calls after the election or not. So kind of a long-winded story to say, kind of nerdy, introverted guy. I like reading. I like video games. I sort of got into politics kind of meandering way, but probably one thing I would just emphasize is that there's a lot more to me than politics. And I completely understand for the people out there who only know me through politics to assume that everything I do is about politics, but there's a lot more to me than that. And it sort of highlights or spotlights, I think, a challenge we have in modern, especially partisan environments, where it becomes very difficult to understand and know a person. Maybe that's partially the media to blame, maybe that's partially the candidates to blame, and maybe it's also the voters to take responsibility, and that they don't seem to necessarily be all that interested in what the human being is behind the votes on city council or the party platform in the provincial legislature or in the prime minister's office. So kind of long-winded introduction, but a very eclectic interest. I love doing a whole bunch of other stuff, and I've just really been feeling blessed over the last year and a half since my election loss, because it's really expanded my horizons, not just figuratively, but also quite literally. And it's given me the chance to do incredible things that the me from 5 years ago would never have imagined possible. And I just want to emphasize it. It's thanks in great part to the support of people who would not have seen eye to eye to me on terms of the politics or my platform or things that I campaigned for in my political life. So I'm so grateful, and it's in great part due to the people at least having an open mind to me and giving me the room and the leeway to learn and to grow.
I wanna kind of work around that a little bit and touch on that a little bit, because I think one of the things that I find particularly interesting about your story is if we go back to the Jeromy Farkas in the University of Calgary, I believe, and I could be wrong. I've already been wrong about an alleged sibling in the pre-interview part, but your degree is in political science.
Yep.
And you were heavily involved in the Manning Center tracking votes for municipal politics. And when you came into the municipal politics realm, I feel like it's not an understatement to say you came in pretty hot. There were some very strong positions. You aligned yourself with some of the alleged conservative council figures to some degree. I mean, there's plenty of photos of the trio of Farkas, Maglioka, and the man whose name I shall not speak on this show. And that was kind of the Farkas brand within city council. You were kind of the firebrand. You got ejected from council at least once that I'm aware of in my cursory reading that I did before this conversation. And so it's the brand, the public persona, and I want to be very clear, we're talking about the public persona, we're not talking about who Jeromy Farkas is, because we're going to spend more time on that in a bit. But the public persona of Jeromy Farkas was very much the conservative firebrand in a lot of ways. And running underneath that conservative flag. And your positions have, I feel like evolved is not even the right word to acknowledge the magnitude of it, because your positions and your willingness to call out the conservative brand have moved a very, very far away from the days of Jeromy Farkas in the Manning Center. Is that a fair assessment?
I would have to say, as time goes on, you learn more, right? It's just, you are the product of life experience. So, for example, there are issues, things that I raised, positions I took that I think just betrayed a lack of life experience. I think one of which was, say, my initial vote against parental leave for city councilors. I said, under no circumstances should this be permitted, and for a councilor to take time off would be, I don't even remember the exact quote. I'm sure people will find it. I think maybe a betrayal of their constituents. And then there was like another time I was actually arguing against city councilors having the ability to travel to other cities to learn how other cities were doing things, how they were executing infrastructure projects and stuff like that. And to be honest with you, Nate, like, it just makes me cringe to think like taking positions like this is not necessarily even the conservative position. It's more like the stupid position, right? And after a certain point, you have to realize, like it makes zero sense to like double down and support stupid things when you know better, right? So part of it is just more life experience on my part, to be honest. But then there's there are other issues where I feel I've been pretty consistent and I've stuck to my guns. For example, I think if you just Google Farkas Wild Rose, I think that the top entry is actually me fighting to have the Wild Rose participate in the Pride Parade. And to my understanding, I think the Wild Rose was only involved in the Calgary Pride Parade once in its tenure as a political party, and that was by virtue of the application that I made by being the Calgary Wild Rose Calgary Elbow Constituency Association president. So the reason I raise this is not to brag, but it's more just to emphasize that in terms of progressive social values and things like that, this has been a relatively consistent passion of mine. And I do really, for longest time, describe myself as fiscally conservative, but socially pragmatic, live and let live, progressive, pro-choice on all of these issues. And it hasn't made me the most popular person within conservative circles, not just in the last 2 months, but probably for the last 10 years. Can you imagine being there, standing up one of 87 constituents of the association presidents who wants the Wild Rose to take a more progressive social stance on issues like gay rights and so on 10 years ago when when the Wild Rose was a thing. So for me, I think that it's been an evolution on some things, and I happily own the areas where I feel I've been able to grow and learn more, have more life experience. But there are elements of my record, things I've advocated for that I do feel quite strongly and proud of. So it's not necessarily a complete 180. The other elements is, I'd say, maybe now that I'm not just in the thick of things with city council, where I get more media coverage than just say a single sound bite, when people can actually hear what I have to say in a radio interview or in a podcast like this in full sentences and full paragraphs, then more of me is coming out. So I think it's maybe a meeting of the two. I think maybe more people out there are a little bit more open-minded about what I have to say. But also on the other hand, maybe I've mellowed out and there's certain areas where I have grown as a human being and I just refuse to continue to do stupid things when I know better.
And that's the part that I'm particularly interested in, because there is a pattern that emerges, especially among young people in political parties. And I don't think, to be clear, I don't think that it's isolated to the right or the left, but it seems like that there's a lot of people who are brought up within that political silo and that bubble who get to be quite, let's go with passionate about their particular political ideology within that silo. And it seems like, you know, part of what you've talked about here so far, and certainly I think that there's a very real public perception. I've had some conversations with some folks being like, what's going on? Like, this is interesting. What's happening here? And I think that that's part of what I'd like to explore a little bit more, because there are people who get into the political game and they get into lockstep and they can't step out of it, but somehow you did. Was it just the mayoral campaign, or was it the traveling? Like, I get the big question that I want to ask you is, we have all of these young folks who have gotten sucked into these political clubs, if you will, and it seems like they've gotten really messed up. And I try to keep the podcast PG, so I'm not going to use the word that I want to use, but how do we unmess them?
Well, that's a great question, because maybe part of it is just the physical removal from settings like that. Because when I was out in the wilderness, for weeks, many days at a time, I could not access the internet if I wanted to, right? And I think having that, as cliche as it sounds, like that social media detox, I think was really helpful. It really helped to be forced into situations with other people where I could not block them or I could not just turn away. Whereas in modern political discourse, that's always an option. If you don't like the email, you just hit delete. If you don't like the point of view, you just block. And then you start to self-curate an echo chamber and the people around you. Whereas for me, I physically no longer had that option. And then part of it's also just, I'm going to say, like, ego and attitude. Like, and I hate to say this, but I think once you are elected, I think everything changes. You don't realize that it changes, but maybe everything doesn't change all at once, but eventually it does. You start to lose touch with the people who sent you into office, and you start to be surrounded with a lot of the same types of individuals, lobbyists, fellow elected officials, government bureaucrats. And I don't say this necessarily to be a negative, but I think there's a lot of like-minded folks around you, and the people who disagree with you are so at odds with your point of view that it almost doesn't feel like worth engaging. So you may go to, for example, in the legislature provincially, you may go to work and be around other elected officials, and all the other UCP MLAs might agree with you if you're part of the UCP, and all the NDP MLAs will disagree with you no matter what. And there's not really incentive to engage. And for me, I had a number of situations on the Pacific Crest Trail where I was just thrown into problems, and the cause and effect was so crystal clear for me. So for example, there's one time, I think it was May of last year, myself and a group of travelers, we had really overestimated our own capabilities, and we're up in this high mountain pass in the Sierra, and weather changed as we were going up this mountain basically, and we became stuck. We were halfway up. We couldn't proceed, but we couldn't backtrack either. And being stuck in a situation like that, as it was with, say, a Bernie Sanders activist, a Chicago defund the police organizer, sitting basically side by side on a ledge, having to burn snow for water, having to engage in conversation, literally having nowhere to go, I think was really just, I'd say, good for my own like conversation skills to be able to talk and have a discussion. And up until earlier to that point, I don't think as a human being I was really capable of genuinely entering a conversation in a way that I would be open to, like, on a foundational level, change my mind. I think when you are in political campaigns and whatnot, you advocate for a position, and any sense of doubt or self-criticism is never, it's not encouraged, nor is it rewarded by the voters. So being in a situation like that was really eye-opening for me. But so is me coming to terms with the fact that we were in this setting, we were in this situation because I was responsible, because I had made the plan for the day, and people were looking to me to know what I was doing. And we were, I can't really swear, but we're up the creek without a paddle, so to speak. And it was for, I think, more than 12 hours that we clung to the side of this cliff at more than about, I think, 12,000 feet in one of North America's most remote places. And again, we had to burn snow in our stoves for water, and one misstep would mean that my life would be over, tumbling down the cliff onto ice and rocks. And it was really then that I learned that of all threats that nature can throw at a man, I think it's our own ego. And to be honest with you, like the experience, it really shook me. I still feel the shame, the embarrassment for bringing things so close to that literal edge. And it was that failure, and not just that failure, but my failure. And this is so important to emphasize, it's my failure that was the best teacher. And I resolved that it wouldn't happen again. And I think it was that early mistake that allowed us to be able to continue on through the other 10 legendary passes. Everyone made it through safe. It was the early mistake that I think allowed us to prevent future ones from being fatal. And it was so goddamn tough for me. It was tough to admit that I was in over my head. And once I did make that admission, the mentors that I needed arrived in my life, and I got to learn something constantly, every single day, from 8-year-olds to 82-year-olds, first-time hikers, seasoned veterans alike. And I was so constantly amazed by their kindness and their patience. And even thinking, say, 4 or 5 years back from that, to stand up in a situation to say that I was wrong, I made this mess, I apologize, and this is what I'll do to correct it. Even saying that string of words together, I felt would have been just impossible. I think I would have rather died than utter those words. But it's a bit of positive reinforcement where, if you're able to admit and own those things, the people around you are generally decent. Maybe it's a non-political crowd that's decent, but the people around you are generally decent, and they'll work with you through that. So to kind of, in a roundabout way, to go back to, I think what you're alluding to is maybe the radicalization of some folks out there on the extreme edges of politics and sort of bleeding their way into the mainstream. I saw that. I was crisscrossing through the United States, through red counties and blue counties during the January 6 hearings. And man, it scared the shit out of me to see how close even relatively blue states like California, I think, are on the verge of civil war, to go through these rural areas and then to urban areas, to see the divide in not just ideology, but just how they view each other as neighbors, really scared the shit out of me. I was occasionally reading some blogs, commentary from conservative candidates up north in Canada, and they were sort of looking at people like Trump, they were looking at people like DeSantis with a kind of lens of hero worship, and watching the rollout of things like the Don't Say Gay legislation in Florida and stuff like that, it really concerned me. And I was sort of living this in a relatively small way where I felt that many of my friends were looking at this as if it was something like an instruction manual when it should have been a cautionary tale. And that really worries me when I think about just the modern conservative movement and some of the behavior of the party politicians, because I still relatively believe I I have a conservative disposition, conservative values, principles, that sort of thing. But even just basic things like the respect for the rule of law, I believe that to be a conservative value and a conservative trait, institutions, that sort of thing. But to see conservative politicians at the provincial level and in the United States to try to erode those controls and to contest democratic results, it just really bothered me. And long way to say that when I came back from the trip, I had opportunities to run federally in an open seat, safe for the Conservatives in Southwest Calgary. I had opportunities to run provincially for the UCP, but I didn't feel comfortable to want to jump back in, given that it's that type of behavior that seems to be rewarded. And any type of criticism, given how tribal politics is definitely not seen very well.
We've experienced that here from time to time, where they don't like the criticism so much. So to paraphrase,
I gave you a lot to go on there.
you did. If I'm getting the gist of it, though, what we need to do is take all of the political radicals and stick them on the side of a mountain and let them find their way down. Am I paraphrasing that appropriately?
Well, you know, there might be something to it, and he and I still butt heads, but Naheed Nenshi and I, our relationship is probably where it should have been 5 years ago. We can tell each other we're full of shit. We kind of laugh. We move on to the next thing, and it really did honestly surprise me, like genuinely, that he was the first person to call me after my election loss to encourage me to get out, to go for a coffee, movie, stuff like that. It just genuinely surprised me, and the fact that many of the other people in my social circle, the moment that I no longer had value or utility to them, they dropped me. It was just, it's not something I wish for anyone to experience, but in hindsight, I'm so glad that I did experience it at a relatively young age, I think 35, to experience that, because it's really enabled me to build a foundation that I know the people who are around me now, they're the ones that I can build upon, that I can support, and it will be mutual in a way to be able to achieve practically anything. So, you know, you could live a long life not knowing who to trust and who's going to stab you in the back the moment they have the opportunity to. But I got that lesson early on in life, which actually makes me so stoked, because just the quality of relationships and friendships is so much better. And I really learned on the Pacific Crest Trail, you're sort of the average of all of the people around you. So by being more cautious about the company you keep, I think can make you a lot happier. And especially like just thinking back, even 5 years ago, I think I know half as much as I did back then. It scares the shit out of me sometimes, but I feel a lot happier for it.
You brought up Mr. Nenshi, and you and Mr. Nenshi had some things to say over the last couple of months, in a pretty potent way. I'm curious, how did you go from, you're back from the trips, and you come back to Calgary, take a look at the lay of the land, and you go, uh-oh. How do you go from that to, I mean, you did panels with Naheed Nenshi talking about the concerns that you had for the direction that the UCP was taking. Can you walk through how that happened?
Yeah, so I think the first early test I had was having this experience of Naheed supporting me. I think he endorsed my run across the country. He was a big avid supporter of mine. He helped us reach, I think, $250,000 in our fundraising goal for Big Brothers and Big Sisters. And he didn't hesitate to jump in and support me when, I think, depending on your point of view, maybe I was radioactive, or there would have been maybe the fear of, okay, what happens next? But he genuinely was interested in helping me. So that the test for me came when I returned. I don't remember the exact timeline or how many days or weeks, but I think it was right after I came back that there's this revealed alleged plot by some individuals wanting to pose with like fake Russian mafia money to try to entrap him. Uh, I don't know if I'm explaining the issue very well, but anyway, there's this completely bogus, or rather just crazy scheme that was revealed, and I guess it's before the courts in terms of whether this actually happened or not. But several, I think, conservative individuals were implicated, and it just, I think it was hours, and then I think a day had passed with the story, and really nobody was jumping to his defense. And I think a lot of people were like very maybe just worried about either ruffling feathers with the developers or pissing off some of their fellow conservative colleagues, or maybe they thought the mayor or the former mayor wasn't that popular. It wasn't, there wasn't any utility. But ultimately, I decided to jump in and say, you know, we fought a lot. Former Mayor Nenshi, he's a lot of things, but he's not crooked. He's not corrupt. And it was a kind of a test for me, because I felt that if there was ever a time for me to reciprocate, it should be now. And that the temptation really was there just to keep my mouth shut. It would have been a lot safer for me. Even just jumping into his defense, I think, burned a lot of bridges for me within the conservative movement. But I felt that it was the right thing to do. And I'm still disappointed that there's many people who sort of agreed with that position, but ultimately didn't decide to publicly support him. And that's really disappointing for me, for somebody like former Mayor Nenshi, who obviously I'm on record contesting a lot of sort of his record or legacy or whatnot. You'll be able to say, the historians will be able to say a lot of things about him one way or another, but I think at a minimum, everybody recognizes that he was not a corrupt mayor. And how fucked up was it that there's conservatives out there who are actually hoping to have had a corrupt mayor, right? So that was one test. And then probably the second one was with, and I'm not sure if this was alleged or it was Mayor Gondek's point of view on this, but the revelation that Councilor Chu was allegedly abusing his authority and access to the staff parkade to, I should be careful in terms of the verbiage. I'm not sure exactly what Mayor Gondek's account was, but basically I think snapping photos of her license plate. The councilor was distributing this and potentially opening her up to security risks and whatnot. And this was another, I think, test for me where it would have been just easier for me to shut up, but I've just felt so frustrated and so hurt that somebody who I had considered a friend would abuse their authority this way, following past substantiated professional misconduct, right? So there's a number of different issues where I don't think it's necessarily giving up on your conservative principles to challenge some of those folks on the right, but I think it's sticking to your guns. It's because you value your principles, your integrity, that you're willing to call those things out and to just toe the line and to support some of these individuals who are doing wrong. I think it would be the exact opposite direction that we should be going as a society. And I think for me, as somebody who comes from sort of a center-right background, I feel like it's my responsibility to call out and to try to hold accountable sort of my side of the spectrum, if that makes sense, because I think that that's the only way that we actually have genuine accountability, because anything that comes from the left of center is just going to be disregarded as sort of partisan rhetoric. So I felt a responsibility there, but it definitely did not make me any friends to speak up on those two issues. But there are people who sort of question me in terms of why I did those things, and it must mean that I've sold out to the socialists or something like that. But man, like we should not have fake Russian mafia plots. We should not have elected officials misusing their authority to put their colleagues at risk, right? These are not like conservative or progressive values. It's not right or left. I think it's right or wrong. And I'm just so grateful that I'm in a position with a platform and like a profile where, you know, I can go take risks. I can try to use my independence and my voice to cover ground that frankly other conservatives seem either unwilling or unable to.
I wanted to explore that a bit because you talked about you taking some of these positions, which are, I, they're pretty defensible. Like maybe don't take pictures of people's identifying information and share that. Doesn't seem like it's a. That seems like something everybody should be able to get behind. Maybe don't try to ensnare people in alleged corruption schemes in order to try to influence the outcome of elections. That seems like that's another one that people should be able to just go, yeah, don't do that. But it's fascinating to me, and I have to be clear again. It exists on both sides of the spectrum, where if you step out of line from what the march is, whether it's right or left, there are people who will say, "Oh, I'm not eating lunch with you anymore."
Well, Nate, I'll give you another example. So I think it's so important for us to hold our side of the spectrum in check because nobody else will. And if we don't do it, then that means the other side, when they get in, they'll be doing it even worse. And I think we'll all be to blame for it. And specifically, look at what happened with the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, his interference with SNC-Lavalin, his cabinet ministers trying to lean on prosecutions. There is an ethics commissioner involved in that, ruling of fault found against the prime minister. There's sort of a collective shrug from the liberal establishment. Progressives sort of hand waved it away, said, this is not an issue. And then fast forward, I think a year or two, I was on the radio sort of condemning the ethics commissioner finding against Danielle Smith, condemning Danielle Smith for in the report, I think a quote is like she was found, her actions were found to be a threat to democracy, quote unquote. And there were many progressives out there who really, really relished in me calling out the premier for this violation of ethics law. But I don't think they should be that smug because she skated away on this issue because she walked the path that was paved by inaction of the left on Justin Trudeau. So I think it became normalized that whether you're a right-wing politician or a left-wing politician, you can get away with violating serious ethics law and trying to impede on prosecutions, right? So this is just a specific example of where Danielle Smith gets away with this, largely, in my view, because of the collective shrug and the public disinterest from what happened with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
It's fascinating to me because it seems like I don't know how we move on that. That's one of the things that we try to explore on the show here is the question of, the public is disenfranchised. Many members of the public are disenfranchised from the political process because they're all a bunch of crooks, which means that the crooks just get more crooked, and then the public goes, see that we're right, they're all a bunch of crooks, and then how do we stop that, do you think?
I think it comes back to positive reinforcement because I thought the election was going to be, or rather, I thought my election loss was going to be the end of my life. I thought this was sort of my high water mark. I went off. I've done a lot of other stuff. I made those comments about former Mayor Nenshi. I made the comments about Councilor Chu. I thought that would have been sort of the deal breaker in a lot of people's minds. I thought that would have led them to no longer want to support me, to distance themselves. I took a risk on another fundraiser in support of the Alex Community Health Center. The idea was 25 peaks in 25 days in January, just completely crazy project. And I thought we were going to be ambitious with $25,000 as the fundraising goal. But we started climbing the peaks. We started doing this stuff. Credit to actually City Councilor Evan Spencer, who joined me on one of the peaks. That guy, Evan, is a beast. Just want to plug that guy. I was like very difficult keeping up with him up Prairie Mountain. Anyway, I thought we were going to struggle to hit the 25,000, but we easily doubled our goal. So for me, it's just the positive reinforcement. I think if you do the right thing, it's never going to be the wrong thing. And I think that the right people will still support you if you are rational, you're reasonable, you're putting out a position that's defensible, and you're not an asshole about it. And I think that's something that I really got caught up with in my time as a city councilor was a lot of the performative aspect where I was playing to the cameras. And often I'd have a winning idea, but it wasn't enough for me to have the idea win. I had to see the other person lose. And if there's just innocent bystanders who are watching an argument or a political discussion, they're probably not going to care too much about the merits of the argument if one side is just so blatantly being a raging asshole about it. So I think if you can try to lower the temperature, if you can try to be rational and you can try to be reasonable, I think that ultimately the public and the voters will reward you in it. And this is really tough because partisan politics and like say UCP or NDP fundraising and whatnot, it happens from the margins. So they don't tend to get donations from people who are generally content with how things are going. Or the moderates, they tend to get the donations from the people who are angry about something on both the left and the right. So I think it's very much a challenge, and maybe in some ways it means that municipal politics is sort of the last bastion where you can have those reasonable debates and those arguments. But you know, I really struggle with this question in terms of where partisan politics is going today. And if I wanted a political comeback, I would have signed up for safe seats with the provincial or federal conservative parties. For me personally, it would have been so much wiser just to shut the fuck up and avoid alienating so many of my former friends and my supporters. But instead, like I feel like I'm just really grateful to have the ability to use my independence and voice to cover ground that other conservatives seem really unable or unwilling to go. And that doesn't mean that I've given up my like conservative values or principles. Like say, for example, like does it make me a socialist now that I'm uncomfortable with our premier boycotting our veterans, boycotting Remembrance Day, boycotting the poppy? You know, I thought it used to be a conservative thing to actually be for our armed forces and the heroes who died for our freedoms, right? So it's not that I really don't feel like I have changed so much, but maybe it's the world that has changed in such a just crazy fashion that all of a sudden there's a lot of other folks who might be from the center or the left of center who might be looking at what I'm saying differently.
I'm gonna chase you down on one of the things that you said there.
Yeah,
You
go
said if
ahead.
I wanted a political comeback, I would have, just taken a safe seat. So what's I want to talk about the arena because I know that's going to be spicy. But before we get there, what's on the horizon for Jeromy Farkas?
Well, I really loving challenging myself, diving into punditry. I'm a little bit more active as a pundit than maybe your typical like MRU political science professor. I think the politics is not a spectator sport, but I'm enjoying the commentating. I'm enjoying the ability to raise issues that other conservatives feel uncomfortable with, and I'm loving diving into the writing, the filming, or rather the filmmaking work, community board work, stuff like that. And going from a political bubble to working every day with people who think just so completely different from me has been really awesome. And I'm getting to do things that, again, that me from 5 years ago would think insane, like 25 peaks in 25 days, hiking through the mountain across the continent. These are things that I definitely don't think would have been possible if I was still in office. And I'm not at a point to share too many details, but my next project right now is to challenge the speed record for the fastest on-foot crossing of Canada from ocean to ocean. And I'm hoping to touch on some themes around reconciliation, climate, and maybe housing with a partner. And we're not quite at the stage to be able to share too many of the details, but man, like I'm the kind of guy, like I just love throwing myself at challenges and problems, and I'm not one to really be happy sitting still in front of a desk, if that makes sense.
It does. So I'm going to make a statement. You can tell me whether or not I'm right or wrong. I know that there's some people who have looked at your adventures over the last 2 to 3 years with a certain degree of cynicism. Is this just Jeromy Farkas rebranding himself so that he can come back and I don't know, run the Alberta Party or something? That's not what this is. This is like the sense that I'm getting from you is this is these explorations that you're doing are giving you a legitimate sense of joy.
Oh, absolutely. And, as I mentioned, if I wanted that political comeback, I could have been appointed in a safe conservative seat provincially. That's not my ego talking. I think I would have, I was asked to do that. Same thing federally. There's an open seat here in Calgary, in Southwest Calgary, where I represented it as a city councilor. And bluntly, if this was a long game to like travel 5,700 kilometers through the mountains to be able to get a conservative nomination, like I would have been able to do that. Same thing, like what I'm a lot of my commentating and stuff like that, and some of the discussions I've been having is frankly alienated quite a few people. So in any event, I think a lot of what I've been doing is made a political comeback relatively less likely, if that makes sense, especially if it's in conservative circles. And nobody likes a traitor, is what I was told, and I should have chosen silence, is what I was told by some of the partisans. But if they liked me at city council for speaking my mind, speaking truth to power, then they should have known what they were getting as far as just who I am as an individual and a person. And I'm not too proud, at least anymore, to admit when I fuck something up, when I was wrong about an issue. And if I learn new things, I'm going to be open to changing my mind. And I think that as ridiculous as politics is these days, I think we need to, for those cynics out there who might be thinking I'm just full of shit, and I think that we need to reserve some room in our mind to allow people we dislike to occasionally make good points that we agree with, and to at least give them the credit where credit is due. But I'm not seeking redemption, if that's some of the commentators have been saying. I'm just trying to live a good life. I'm trying to do the things that I find to be fun, that I enjoy, and in so doing help other people. And I think there's also the common criticism or accusation that say the 25 Peaks in 25 Days or the Pacific Crest Trail, there's the accusation that these were publicity stunts. And I'd say, of course they were publicity stunts. That's the nature of charitable fundraising, right? Like you don't, if you're trying to raise $250,000 or $500,000, as we did, you don't do that like quietly with a link to a page that nobody sees. But of course it was a publicity stunt. And just being the campaigner or the political strategist, I can say, of course, doing stuff like that does not hurt brand or profile if you're trying to jump back into politics down the road. But even if I was angling again to be mayor, it would have been a lot easier to have like a safe MLA seat or a safe MP seat to be able to fundraise off of, to build that off of as a jumping platform. But for me, again, like I just enjoy doing so many other things, and I'm not just the political creature. But one other way I'd say it is like, I'm not trying to rehash the past election. I support our mayor and council because I think they need our support, for example, to get a better arena deal, things like that. And I deserve to lose that mayoral campaign because I ran in such a one-dimensional way, and I was really closed-minded to essential parts of the job. And again, like I'm not refighting all these battles that people want me to. And the fact that I'm not engaging with the Twitter trolls and fighting those battles from years ago, I think frustrates a lot of people. I'm just getting out there trying to live my life, have fun, and to try to help other people in the process. But it doesn't mean that I'm a perfect person. It doesn't mean that I'm not a flawed human being. But if anything, I'm just really grateful that when I can come face to face with my fears, with new evidence, with changing my mind, that the vast majority of the folks out there have been really, really decent to me and given me the open mind and the ability and the space to be able to learn and to grow.
You're teeing me up. You're doing all my work for me tonight. This is absolutely so easy. You talked about supporting council. You talked about the arena deal right there. And it seems like, I mean, we've done a couple of episodes where we've kind of touched on the deal. And I mean, I don't even know if I mean, it's a deal for somebody, but there's a very real argument to be made that it's not a deal for Calgarians or taxpayers across the province at all. What's your take on the arena deal.
Mhm.
One of the and I'm going to preface this by saying one of the justifications that has been put out there for this arena deal is, well, it's pretty much the same arena deal that we have now, and we really needed the provincial support for the infrastructure around
Mhm.
the area. So it's it's a tempest in a teapot. What do you make of that?
So have you done a deep dive for your followers yet on like the comparison between the old deal and the new deal?
No.
Yeah, so if you don't mind me getting into the weeds, so
Please.
under the old deal, that our council, myself, Jeff Davison, Naheed Nenshi, and others had agreed to, taxpayers paid half the cost and recovered most of that money back. And after the increases we gave to the budgets, the Flames would be on the hook for 100% of the cost overruns. We would get a 2% ticket tax. We would get a share of the naming rights. We would get basically most of our money back. And under this new deal, taxpayers will pay for 95% of the deal upfront, and we receive no money back. We get no revenue. We get no ticket tax. We get no parking fees. We get no naming rights. So again, it allows CSEC to Calgary Sports and Entertainment Company to put in only 5% of the upfront cost to receive about 100% of the profits. And for a quick and dirty analysis, this is not a proven number, but it's the ballpark depending on the experts. But over the lifetime of the agreement, I think it's fair to estimate that it's about an $8 billion revenue that ultimately the CSEC will enjoy in exchange for $40 million of the upfront cost and a $17 million a year payment that increases only 1%. And it goes down in real terms with inflation. So this is just, it's a bad deal all around. It's a great deal for the Flames. I don't begrudge the Flames, but I think generally, if we're going to be partners in this kind of exercise, we should be equal partners on the upside and the downside. With this new deal as well, if the new building is destroyed or damaged in the event of another flood, it will be on taxpayers 100% to replace the building for the Flames. So that's a big liability. And the new location is just as flood prone, if not more flood prone than the existing Saddle Dome. And there's other issues with now we're also sharing in the cost overruns, whereas under the old amended deal, the Flames were 100% on the hook. So they actually had the incentive to make sure that everything came in with an appropriate budget. So there's a number of different problems with this. And if I were to guess, though, I think it was the council that was really feeling the heat for things like transit safety or lack thereof, defunding the police, and past decisions like basically declaring a meaningless climate emergency at the same time as allowing unprecedented greenfield development. And I think Mayor Gondek and the others, I think they wanted to win anything, any deal at any cost. And that's why they were so desperate to hitch their wagon to Danielle Smith. Basically, I think it was 2 days before the writ drop at what was very, very transparently a UCP campaign event. And I think cynically, the council must have done the calculation and thought that the UCP was going to win anyway. And they wanted also to keep a good relationship with developers for campaign finance reasons. And I think that makes things become a bit more understandable, but still bad, to be clear. And one thing I just want to emphasize to be crystal clear, I'm not trying to shit on Gondek so much as encourage folks to give her the, I'm going to say, public pressure / support that she needs so that she and council have no choice but to go back and get us more favorable terms. And I think that's the only reason that we got what was, in my view, still a bad deal, but a much better deal previously, because Mayor Nenshi had essentially campaigned on this, gone to the wall with Bettman and others and campaigned on getting a fair shake. And the Flames knew that he had the public will behind him. Whereas I think this council and this mayor are so deeply unpopular that CSEC knows that they don't really have a strong bargaining position.
It's wild to me. One of the criticisms that I've seen out there is that there was, you take a look at this council, and there were a lot of people who campaigned on sort of this uh, ill-defined progressive agenda that led to things like the climate emergency, but we're not going to do anything substantive being declared. And it's fascinating to me that you have this a good chunk of this council rode in on this progressive wave, and when the rubber hits the road and there's this arena deal, they all go, ah, but we need a win. Like that's again, it's one of the themes that you've been sort of touching on throughout our conversation is you've been talking about sort of having the strength of your convictions, and it's I've had countless conversations with folks who have said, but how was it unanimous? And like if it passes, it passes. We've seen some things pass over the last little while that got walked back, like the affordable housing piece. But um, this was a unanimous vote. I'm curious, how is it just the pure craven politics that you think got it to the unanimous vote part? Because it seems like any councillors that have sort of been pressed for, hey, this seems like it might kind of be a shit deal, have gone, no, it's the best deal ever. I'm not, rah. And there hasn't been much.
I think being the one guy to stand up and say no, that's not a recipe for political success. I think that they're I think no matter what, there's people out there who are going to think that you're obstinate or petulant for saying no. And I think there's so much danger to being just the single one vote against. And if they were looking across the room, the faces, and they said, there just wasn't going to be enough strength in numbers, they probably just decided to go along with it. And I think council, again, they're paying for the arena through reserves, and these reserves are unrestricted. They could go to literally anything else, including to say top off housing funds, to top off family and community support services, other areas, frankly, that have gotten cuts under this mayor and council, like essential mental health services. There's only so much money. So money put into the arena cannot go elsewhere. So it's crystal clear to show, or rather to say, that council has chosen to fund the arena at the expense of other programs such as these. And I think it just cuts the legs off of them whenever they talk about lip service to climate or to housing or to affordability or to transit safety, all of this other stuff. And I think that it's going to be really dangerous for this council, because when it comes to that so-called, in air quotes, like progressive agenda, it only seems like it's lip service to these things, but it might have been some American politician that says, don't tell me what you value, show me what you budget, show me how you spend your money, and that is what you value, right? So at a time when they're cutting mental health services, they're making all of these other really harmful long-term reductions, but still they find upwards of $1 billion in taxpayer money to fund a corporate giveaway is just mind-boggling to me. And I'm sure there's people listening who say that my comment here is maybe it's sour grapes, I'm mad about losing the election. No, I fully embrace that. Again, I said I lost the election, I think, for a good reason. And it is personal for me, though. You are right about that part, but it's not personal for the reason that you may think. I just think that Mayor Gondek and some of these other councillors, the people that they're trying to cater to right now, they will drop Mayor Gondek and the rest of them the moment, the very instant that they're no longer useful to them. And trust me, I know this from personal experience. So my frustration here is not necessarily seeing a vulnerability and trying to dunk on the city council at a vulnerable time. Again, my message is I think we need to rally behind and alongside these councillors and the mayor, read pressure / support so that they can actually get us a better deal. Because this is just completely outrageous, the current direction that they're going, where no meaningful progress and just symbolic gestures. And when it comes to actually how they're spending their money and what areas they're cutting is absolutely ridiculous to me. And I think it should be to both conservatives and progressives.
I mean, the question that I keep going back to is everybody's scared of the core, allegedly. And it's Thunderdome down there these days, I'm told.
Scared of the core? How? What do you mean?
We have the premier of the province talking about this public safety emergency that's going on in the downtown cores. I think that there are people who maybe look a little bit scary but aren't actually all that scary once you get to talk to them. That's just my opinion. But if there is this public perception of it's Thunderdome down there, how are you going to convince people to attend an event center when all of the underlying issues, the mental health and addiction stuff, the supply stuff, those are going largely unaddressed? If not, and some people would argue when we're talking about the substance abuse stuff, that there is real evidence that the province is moving in the wrong direction in regards to it.
Yeah, and I think it's not an either or in terms of long-term prevention and immediate protection, right? I think we need to do both. And I think that was a mistake that I made in terms of my time on council. Like, I was just very focused on the policing equation, on the support for CPS, without actually looking in terms of the long-term investments that we can make to actually reduce the burden. And I think that's also something that a lot of the defund the police advocates missed, was that they wanted to go all in on these preventative supports and in a single year do drastic cuts to CPS. And to me, it's quite obvious now that we need an all of the above solution. So crime and safety and all the rest, it's perceived and it's actual. And if people don't feel safe, then they are unsafe, regardless of the evidence of the number of incidents, the issues, and like the statistics I think are pretty damning. I do think that we have a safety crisis in downtown, especially with transit, but it's really, frankly, pissed me off to see some of the conservatives just gaslighting a lot of the legitimate criticisms that people have in terms of the emergency that we have on transit. And frankly, Danielle Smith was able to tap into this, and just by virtue of talking to a lot of folks, especially suburban Calgarians who might be taking transit to the downtown for work, she was able to tap into this and present a solution that the NDP just didn't have on this as an issue. So I think it just goes back to, what is council prepared to fund when they've really maxed out their credit card on the arena? They have zero latitude really for additional investments in the areas of both policing and long-term prevention.
I got one more topic I want to pick your brain on. You've been very generous with your time, and I appreciate
Yeah,
that. But I got to ask you, because you have made very clear comments, and we're going to talk about perhaps the person who should most spend some time on the top of a mountain, the newly elected MLA for Lacombe Ponoka. So Jennifer Johnson came out. She made some absolutely abhorrent statements about trans kids. This comes, I mean, we're having this conversation on June 12th. It'll probably around the 14th or the 15th, but we're having this conversation on June 12th, the record. We're square in the middle of Pride Month, and it seems like this year in particular, we are seeing a marked increase in intolerance and bigotry towards the LGBTQ2S plus community. And it seems like there were multiple UCP candidates. The candidate for Lethbridge West, she tapped out. I would argue she didn't say things that were as bad as what Jennifer Johnson said. I have, my thoughts on that. But what do you make of, we have these politicians, we have these people who have higher profiles, and they are putting this garbage out there. And this is another one of those, how would you propose that we hold politicians to account when they spew this kind of garbage?
Oh,
aside from throwing them on top of the mountain, which I'm all for. I think your next fundraiser, you should run to Saskatchewan and back or something, and all the money goes towards putting all the bigots on the top of a mountain so they can learn some hard life lessons. That's just me. But that's obviously a bit of a lighthearted approach to it. But how do we address that? Because it seems like the thing that I find most stunning, and I'm going to hold the NDP to account on this as well, because they had a candidate who, in their nomination, it came out that they had said some pretty horrid things about trans folks themselves. And they made the promise that they were going to be a champion for the LGBTQ2S plus community. I have seen them in one photo that was not shared on their social media, where they were attending a Pride themed event, but other than that, they have not even acknowledged the existence of Pride Month. So it's not something that's just happening on the right. The right are saying some really, really gross things, and they seem to be taking a bit of a walk on it, but the left are doing it too. How do we get everyone to stop being bigoted? In 10 words or less.
Oh, oh, I sort of get the sense that you might be giving me a softball to maybe reintroduce the story I shared on the eye opener. Is that right?
I try not to force people into corners. I invite them.
But you know, and I still so much struggle with this, and I so appreciate the way that you've broached the topic, because it can often be uncomfortable to share your story. It can be so uncomfortable to ask, and like, so I think it's the 7-year anniversary of what happened to Orlando, the massacre there, and it was all because basically some guy took offense to seeing two men kiss in public. And if anybody out there has ever asked, like, why isn't there a straight pride parade? And that's why, because you've never had to look over your shoulder before holding your partner's hand. So for many people out there, like, pride, it might seem frivolous to you, but you know, for many people, it's the first and it's the only time through the year that they can express their love and who they are with only minimal fear of repercussions. And like, I'm really grateful that we live in a place like Alberta. We didn't, what I think what we saw with how the community rallied against Jennifer Johnson, I think was really good. I think the UCP action was appropriate to disqualify her, or rather just not have her sit in caucus, but I think it still came later than I would have liked. I think it was maybe 3 or 4 days that the story was allowed, and depending on who you ask, maybe they were doing polling or focus testing on that. And again, it really frustrated me, and it gave me the sense that there's still so much more work to do within the party. But it was really good to see how Albertans rallied to condemn her comments. And I was thinking a lot about that in terms of whether I should comment, what should say in my commentary. And what I really, 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 really regret about my campaign for mayor was listening to a lot of my team members who urged me to never mention my LGBTQ identity. And I think it was for them just trying to play it safe, to be that safe conservative cardboard cutout, and to not alienate people that we needed their votes, in air quotes. And I think I'm just really ashamed that I went along with that. And I think part of it was the political, but the majority of it probably was the personal, because I was afraid of honestly being targeted, of having that bullseye on my back again. And as I had shared on CPC as a child, I came out to my best friend, and overnight this guy basically became one of my biggest bullies, and I was tormented relentlessly. I was physically, verbally, and sexually assaulted, and I was in a situation so desperate that I tried to get access to the school computer, and I searched basically how to commit suicide. And I was further along in the planning than I would like to admit to, but it was really just random chance that I was interrupted, and before I could carry out my plan. And it was all because the right person had observed my distress, and they had treated me with the sheer basic kindness that I deserved to receive as a kid. And if I was in such a vulnerable, desperate, dark place at that time, and I heard commentating, like, if I heard the video or the comments, like,
there you are.
oh, what a time for that to happen. I think my internet died. here at home. You're on my cell phone. I don't know if you can still hear me. Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you fine, and we can I can mix that together, or I can just say it cut out right after you were talking about how it would have impacted you um, if you had seen that sort of commentary from people in high profile.
Yeah. So if I had heard comments like that in such a dark, desperate place, then I don't think I'd be here talking to you today. And the reason I raise this is because it's not a left or right issue. It's not a conservative or progressive issue. I think it's more than even right or wrong. I think it can be life or death for a lot of folks. And I think there's many, particularly on the conservative side of things, and I'm sure that this cuts through party lines, but I think particularly where the work needs to be done is in the conservative movement on this. The education, not everyone out there knows what they don't know. And again, the reason I raise this is that LGBTQ youth, individuals, particularly transgender youth, face much higher incidents of self-harm, higher suicide rates, bullying, other horrible things. And again, these are just kids. And under no circumstances should it be acceptable to equate them to pieces of shit like this candidate did. So all of this to say, and this is the part that I struggle with the most, is I want to live in a world where people can learn, they can live, and they can grow. And I know that the premier was very quick to jump in and say that this individual has a path to redemption or an ability to get back into caucus sometime in the future. I'm going to park my frustration with that. It sort of felt like she was walking back the ejection. The premier again then came out and said, no, her decision's final. She won't be sitting in caucus, which is good. Anyway, but a long rambling way to say that I want to live in a world where people can learn and live and grow, and they can be educated about the things that they don't know. And I think that there's many among in the community who would say that, no, this person is dead to me. They're the persona non grata. They should not be engaged with whatsoever. But I think that that actually sends us down a darker road because it encourages individuals who have those views to just double down. It encourages them to just continue to associate with people who continue to have those views. And it puts her or him or whoever has those views in a situation or position where they continue to perpetuate those views. So yes, I would like to live in a world where ultimately an individual like this can be educated and they can be brought on board to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. But man, it's very tough. It's very tough to be advocating for redemption if there's no other way to put it. But the only alternative is if you don't engage with individuals like this, or at least give them the path to learn and to know better and to engage with the community. If you don't give them these things, they're just going to double down and they're going to be even more harmful and more dangerous, bluntly. So as tough for me as it is, I'm sort of on the side of we have to engage with people like this because with the only reason that say even we made the inroads on gay marriage and other things is because we were able to flip some of the people who ultimately were opponents, maybe even legislatively at the political level. Ultimately, they became allies. And it was frankly some of the most harshest critic of marriage equality in both Canada and the United States who ultimately became supporters. And we needed their assistance to be able to get to where we are. So it's a real tough one. It really strains patience and kindness. But ultimately, I'll land in a place where we need to take those comments seriously, but we need to engage with those individuals who have those views, because for the vast majority of them, I have to assume that they don't have evil in their hearts. I have to assume that they're not trying to do the wrong thing for the sake of the wrong thing. And I have to assume that the majority, ultimately, when you're able to work with them to help them learn and to grow about what they don't know, then they can be part of the solution. But, it's real tough to see the election results in Ponoka-Lacombe where it's more than, I think, 2-1 margin that an individual like this can elect it on views that I really, really do feel are disqualifying for any position of authority.
Last night on our live show, we had a robust conversation, I'll say, around Pride and the reactions of some folks to Pride. And I was very grateful because a very good friend of mine called into the show and corrected some things that had been said and had been corrected. She just corrected them from a much more educated and clinical approach, which was tremendously valued because there were some things that were said that were not true. But one of the things that she raised was how important it was that kids know that it gets better.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, given the story that you just shared about the horrifying experiences that you went through, what would Jeromy Farkas today say to Jeromy Farkas back then?
Oh, I again, it comes back to I was very scared to sort of day like this. It was always it wasn't that I came out on the radio segment. It was sort of it was always known that I was a member of the community. The reason that I raised it and I felt I had to is I'm in a position where I'm loved. I feel supported. I have incredible friends. I have a wonderful personal and professional support network. I've look, I've tasted success. I've suffered setbacks. I've walked practically from ocean to ocean. I've uh, stood on the tallest mountains. I like to think that I've really gotten a good look at this place. And the world out there is as every bit beautiful as you. You are loved, whether or not these people out there on the fringes and the extremes believe that. You are beautiful, you are loved, and that's the number one message that I would use my platform and position of authority, such as it is. But that's everything that I heard when I needed it, and I think it's just so important for us when and where we can to emphasize that. And bluntly, I don't think it's going to be. It's going. I don't want to make this political again, but I don't think it's going to be good enough for conservative parties in the future to be elected on a position of tolerance. Like I think this idea of I tolerate you is not it's not acceptable anymore. I think it has to be clearly, regardless of where you come from, who you are, what you want to be, who you love, that you are welcome, you are loved in a place like Canada. So I think just tolerance is not going to be sufficient for any mainstream political party, period, in this city, province, country. And I think that we're getting somewhere, but there's just setbacks upon setbacks that can sometimes challenge even the most devout as far as their faith when it comes to stuff like this. But again, I would just return on that emphasis that I've been a hell of a lot of places. I've met so many incredible people, and the vast majority of folks who call this city, this province, this country home are kind, great people. And there's no better place that I would rather live than Calgary. And that's the message that we got to keep drumming until we drown out the other voices that might feel otherwise.
I just got to point out real quick. You gave me the biggest flashback to the old 2 and 7 jingle. I don't know if I'm probably dating myself horribly, but the Calgary, there's no better place I'd rather be. I swear to God, that's a lyric right out of that. I want to give you the chance. Anything else you want to say? The floor is all yours. Anything you want people to hear? Whatever you got.
Oh God, I think I've been talking long enough, but I think after I'm no longer in office, my license to talk has been revoked. So I would just say thanks to the folks who have been open-minded to the work that I'm doing. Thanks to the friends who have been with me all the way. Thanks to the new friends who have been supporting me. Thanks to those even in conservative partisan politics who are still happy to be seen in public with me. And to the haters, to the detractors that just after the election just wanted me to crawl up into some hole and die and never be seen again. I'm sorry, that's not my style, but the fact that you have the criticisms and the frustrations with me that you do, all it does is it motivates me, right? I'm not that I'm trying to prove anybody wrong, but it just motivates me to do the best that I can with what I know now. And man, I have a lot of exciting plans over the next couple months and next couple years, and I'm definitely going to be hitting everybody up on more donations for stuff. So again, charitable causes.
With those publicity stunts.
Yeah, publicity stunts. Exactly. The more people, again, whether you hate them, whether you love them, the more people talking about a certain cause that's the special sauce that makes those campaigns successful.
Awesome. Mr. Farkas, I want to thank you so much for taking the time for chatting tonight and for being as candid as you have. And I'm looking forward to seeing this details on this amazing race across Canada, and if there will be puzzles along the way.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Thank you so much, sir. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, we would love it if you swung by our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab and signed up for a small monthly sponsorship of the work that we're trying to do here. It is because of the support that we receive from our Patreon sponsors that we're able to continually up our game, and it is tremendously appreciated. So I want to throw a big thank you out to them, and you can go ahead and visit that website and join and support us as well, because we need all the help we can get. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for listening and being part of these important conversations. And we will see you next time on The Breakdown.